today I'll be reacting to your Elden Ring hot takes. So I made a community post and I also sent a message to my Discord just asking you guys to send me all of your Elden Ring hot takes. I got quite a lot of hot takes, so I'm not going to be able to address every single one that was sent to me, but I'm going to do my best to cover the majority of them. If you guys end up enjoying this video, just let me know and I'd totally make a part 2 if you guys want to see it. Let's not waste any time, let's get right into the first hot take. This one coming from Dr. Loguy on Discord. Another hot take I have, there are no best Souls games, only opinions. Anybody who says best Souls game is just playing favorites, my main hot take. Honestly, I can agree with that, but I feel like that goes for literally like any game. Look at any other franchise. Best example that I can think of would be like the Resident Evil franchise, for example. You have a lot of people that say like Resident Evil 5 is the worst one, or Resident Evil 6 is the worst one. Meanwhile, some other people will say like, oh, Resident Evil Village is my favorite, Resident Evil 2 is my favorite, Resident Evil 4 is my favorite. It really just comes down to preference, and I feel like that goes for literally anything. But when just talking about Souls games, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like for me, Dark Souls 1 is still my personal favorite, even though objectively there is other From Software games that are much better than Dark Souls 1 in many aspects. Something about Dark Souls 1 just keeps me coming back to it, and it's all around my favorite one. This one I won't include an image because it was in me and this person's DMs, and I don't want to expose the other texts that were above that. This is coming from Computer Magic on Discord, and he says, not holding your hand is a cop-out by fanboys and isn't an excuse for poorly explaining game mechanics and story points. The final boss was disappointing, all that just to fight a giant space slug. Elden Ring has the worst soundtrack in this series by far. So those were 3 different hot takes, and we'll address this part by part. So the first one, not holding your hand is a cop-out by fanboys and isn't an excuse for poorly explaining game mechanics and story points. I agree with this to a certain extent. Like, I like the fact that these games don't hold your hand, but I feel like there is some instances, like very particular instances, where I wish that it would explain things a bit more. The first one that I can think of is when it comes to like the stat descriptions for items. So you'll pick up, say, a talisman and it says increases health, stamina, and weight load. But then I'm sitting there asking, wait, but by how much does it increase my health, stamina, and weight load? Or I'll pick up something that increases strength and I'm like, okay, but by how much does it increase my strength? How much will this help? Or another one that says lowers FP consumed by skills. Okay, but by how many, like, percentage are we talking? How much is this actually going to help versus another talisman or buff that does the same thing? This is a very touchy subject. Like, there's parts of it that I agree with and parts of it I disagree with. Like, it's very conflicting because on one hand, I like how it doesn't hold your hand, but on the other hand, there is a few things that I feel like the game could explain just a little bit better. Then the next one, the final boss was disappointing. All that just to fight a giant space slug. I thought aesthetically the boss was cool, but mechanically the boss is completely terrible. Half of its moveset sucks. The fact that it runs away half the battle sucks. Those moments where it's like shooting fire AoEs at you and it's going up in the sky and then like summoning in those golden rings, or it's like coming in for the big attacks, like swinging at you with a sword. Those moments, I like those moments in the fight. That is one of the few examples I can think of in From Software games where a big boss was actually done well, but then like the other half of its moveset, like the golden light rays, like it's not even that hard to dodge. It's like more annoying than anything. And the fact that it's telegraphed so like long before he actually does it, it just ends up consuming time more than anything, because again, it's not a hard one to dodge, and even if you get caught off guard and don't dodge it immediately, you're still fine. You just do a quick dodge and sprint away from it. It's an annoyance more than anything that slows down the battle, because the whole time that he's doing that move, literally nothing else is happening. Oh, and don't even get me started on the golden homing balls attack. That move is, it's dumb. It's just dumb. That move is just stupid. I have no idea why it's in the game. Like, there's no way to really evade it. You just kind of gotta wait it out. It's such a bizarre move. The fact that he runs away so much and they didn't give you access to Torrent in this fight, like, what were they thinking? I understand that Torrent might have made this fight like a little bit too easy, but on the same hand, I feel like they should have left that choice to the player, considering they introduced this whole new mechanic and moveset into the game with Torrent, and the fact that you can't use it in the final boss just doesn't feel right, especially when the boss runs away as much as it does and with how big the arena is. It feels like it was built for Torrent. Elden Ring has the worst soundtrack in the series by far. That third one, I can definitely agree with. While the soundtrack is not bad and it's still epic and grand, the fact that it's an open world and I guess there's so much to the game, it leads to it feeling very generic, I guess, overall. It's weird. Like, while the soundtrack is good, it's good in a generic way. It lacks, like, real personality like the Dark Souls games have. And again, that's not to say that it's bad, because it still has its own personality. It feels grand and epic, but it feels grand and epic in the same generic way that any other RPG could pull off, really, when it comes to the soundtrack, at least. Bloodborne has a better soundtrack. Sekiro, I haven't played the game, but I've heard a lot of the soundtrack. That soundtrack in itself, just from what I've heard, is better. The Dark Souls series, chef's kiss from Software at their best in the soundtrack department. Let me just reiterate once more, Elden Ring does not have a bad soundtrack. I love the soundtrack in this game. It is amazing. It lacks that touch of personality that the other ones had. There's a few tracks from this game that I could see becoming like iconic, like the ambient music that you hear in Limgrave is really good, for example. It's not too overwhelming, but it's not too subtle. It's there. It fits the vibe. I like the music there. It gives me vibes almost like a Firelink Shrine or a Majula. You feel safe. In Limgrave, even though there's enemies around, obviously it's like the safest area in the game. You feel safe in a very odd way. It fills you with that same feeling that you had at Firelink Shrine, where it's like, you feel safe at this area, even though you know danger is around you in every direction. And then when it comes to the boss fights, most of them have pretty good soundtracks, like Godric's soundtrack. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started on that. That one is absolutely epic. But outside of Godric, I failed to really think of too many others that actually stuck with me, unlike the Dark Souls games where every boss soundtrack sticks with me. Horus Demon, I can hear the soundtrack now, like the frantic strings as he's like jumping over and chasing down the bridge, and when it slows down, he's like, nah, nah, and he's like getting close to you, getting ready to smash your head in with his hammer. Like, I remember stuff like that. Or the way that all the instrumentals just like hit you at once in the beginning of the game with the Asylum Demon, or when you go to fight the Bell Gargoyles, once again you hear all the strings like frantically going, and it just gets bigger and bigger. By the time that the second Bell Gargoyle comes in, the soundtrack just gets bigger and bigger, and it's just, it works. It's so good. Don't even get me started on the soundtrack with Gwen, you know, the faint piano keys, and it's very subtle. It's almost like the soundtrack in itself used to tell a story. And in this game, it's lacking something there. It's just lacking that little bit of personality. All right, I talked about that one for way longer than I planned to, so let's keep moving here. Next up, this one comes from Sniperman on Discord for the video. Fire Giant shouldn't exist. It's so stupid. I agree with you. Fire Giant is absolutely terrible. Okay, next up, that doesn't mean the gods can do us any better. It's only those two bosses in particular that ruined the experience for me. And I replied spicy. I honestly agree, TBH, because I do. Fire Giant is just terrible game design at its core. You can disagree with me all you want, but it's terrible. It has an artificially inflated health pool just to inflict a sense of difficulty without actually making the game mechanics themselves harder, which is what literally any other Souls boss up to this point has done. They use the game mechanics and they make those more difficult to inflict the difficulty, not by artificially inflating the health pool. At that point, it's no better than, like, I don't know, a boss from an Assassin's Creed game. I mean, I know there's not really bosses in that game, but you know what I mean. When you go to, like, fight somebody in an Assassin's Creed game that you're not exactly leveled up enough for, and you have to sit there and you're, like, hacking away at them for like 5 minutes straight just to get them down. Not the old Assassin's Creed, by the way. I'm talking about like the new ones, like the new RPG ones, like the ones where it's like the levels are the artificial difficulty of the game. That's how Fire Giant feels. Very lazy. It's a stupidly easy fight, and the only thing that makes it hard is the fact that it's a war of attrition with the health bar, and that does not mean it's any good. It's an awful fight. The Godskin duo, I don't know. I mean, they're annoying, but I can live with them. I can see why a lot of other people hate them. You got Big Boy Fat rolling and the other one tossing his spells at you. Yeah, it's a bit overwhelming sometimes. And again, though, I'm just weird. Like I said, I didn't really find Godskin Duo that bad, but I can totally understand why people don't like it. We have like a 2-in-1 right here. So the first one is from Kuso on Discord. It says Malekith was too easy. Honestly, I don't think Malekith was necessarily too easy. I think Malekith was just right, honestly, and that's Cinnamon Sins. I think that the bosses in Elden Ring aren't as great as everyone says they are. They're not too hard, they're just not as fun as other Souls bosses. DS3 and Sekiro looking at you. There are obviously exceptions, though. I also have fundamental disagreements with the ideas of the game. Open world Souls doesn't work very well, in my honest opinion. Ends up being a lot of empty space, and the later areas feel rushed. Consecrated Snowfield, anyone? Yes, Consecrated Snowfield. What a waste of space. I literally can't even think of a reason to go there, unless you're going to the Hallowed Tree. It serves as nothing more than an in-between point. And then just not as fun as other Souls games, still love it though. I completely agree with that. So let's break this down part by part. I think the bosses in Elden Ring aren't as great as everyone says they are. Yes, I completely agree with that. It feels like the boss design in Elden Ring just went compared to the other Souls games. I have no idea what happened there. So in Elden Ring, my biggest problem is the fact that so many bosses rely on a gimmick for their difficulty, when in every other From Software game up to this point, the difficulty of the bosses came down to your skill and your ability to fight them, and then the actual mechanics of the boss themselves. However, in Elden Ring, I can think of multiple examples where the difficulty comes down to one gimmick. So if we look at Millennia, Millennia is an easy boss. Incredibly easy. Probably one of the easiest in the game, especially when you consider how low her poise is and how easily you can just infinitely stagger her into oblivion. The only thing that makes Millennia hard is Waterfowl Dance, but once you learn about freezing pots and you throw it at her every time that the debuff goes away, you will literally kill her in maybe 2 minutes max. Mohg, another stupidly easy boss, and the only thing that makes it hard, and the only reason that you struggle in the fight, is because of the ceiling stab move. You want to know how to counter the ceiling stab move? Either A, you mash extra square to heal up, or B, you go get this tier for your physic flask. And I've heard people argue against this, being like, well, you know, once you go finally find that tier for your physic flask, that's when you get the feeling of, oh yeah, I learned how to defeat the boss. But no, that's never where that feeling came from in previous Souls games. In previous Souls games, the feeling of, oh, I overcame that was, well, actually overcoming it, not drinking a certain tier in your flask. And then Fire Giant, we already talked about that. That boss is absolutely abysmal. While there was certain, like, gimmicky moves in previous games, for example, you had Soul of Cinder, where he had that little, like, really big wind-up, and then he could, like, combo you real quick and get you down in about 5 seconds if you weren't careful. While I wouldn't necessarily call any of these moves BS, they're definitely gimmicky. Even though Soul of Cinder is my favorite fight in all of the From Software games, I can kind of admit that like, flurry combo is a bit egregious sometimes. The fact of the matter is, when you look at that move compared to, like, you know, any of the other ones in Elden Ring, like, sure, the ones in Elden Ring are telegraphed for a reasonable amount of time. Like Soul of Cinder, he's standing there for a solid 3 seconds like this, giving you more than enough time to sprint halfway across the arena to avoid it. Meanwhile, Millennia's just like, ring, and you're dead. Then the next part, open world Souls games doesn't work very well in my honest opinion. I think that open world Souls does and can work, but I do feel like the scope should be restricted a bit, because I don't want to spoil a later hot take in this video, but there does end up being a lot of empty space, and with that empty space, From Software will obviously do their best to fill in the empty space, and how they end up doing that is using a bunch of recycle bosses. Like I said, that's a later hot take. Hopefully we can actually get to it in this video. Yeah, especially later in the game, like the areas feeling rushed, I would 100% agree with that. Like Mountaintop of the Giants, I can't think of a single reason you'd want to go there. Consecrated Snowfield, whatever. Leyndell, Ashen Capital, literally nothing to there. What, like, the last quarter of the game is literally just a boss rush. Like, Frumazula didn't even have that much to it. Like, sure, there's some other optional bosses and quests to do there, but that's really it. And then, again, you go to the Ashen Capital, and nothing is happening there. This is really similar to, like, an Anor Londo situation from Dark Souls 1. Basically, everything after the big golden city is just kind of... It's not bad by any means. It's far from being bad, but it's not up to the standard that you were brought to expect by that point in the game. Yeah, I definitely think that is valid criticism, and I do agree with most of that. Hot take number 5. Millennia should have been... Alright, next one. This one coming from Scoutcat on Discord. Melee is boring. A glass cannon, int, or any faith build is leagues more fun than pure bonk sticks, which all I ever see boiled down to for maximum efficiency is jump attack, maybe an R1, never R2 unless you want to die. Could chain in one Ash of War if the build isn't entirely built around it, which seems oddly common and overused. And a little more, at least in PvP, even against a lot of PvE encounters and even some bosses, but hey, maybe I'm just watching the wrong folks. Honestly, I don't think Melee is that boring. I think that maybe you just need to experiment with different builds a bit more, maybe. I find Melee to be actually more fun in this game. Not more fun than previous Souls games. Like, I feel like it lacks some of the depth that the previous Souls... I know that sounds weird, but if for some reason this game's Melee seems more straightforward than the previous Souls games, maybe I'm just crazy about that. Like, sure, there's the Ash of Wars implemented into it, but, like, once you actually get into the combat, there's very little variety. It's usually, okay, get a good Ash of War and just spam that until the boss is dead. If you optimize your build correctly, like say, for example, you're using a Colossal Greatsword, there is no reason to press R1, R2, or RB/RT if you're on Xbox for literally any reason if you're using the right talismans, because your Lion's Claw, for example, will be doing like 4 times the damage that any other attack could do. Saying that Int or Faith is leagues more fun than pure bonk sticks, I feel like that's more up to the player, and especially like what bosses you're going up against. Like using Faith against Renala, I heard that she's like pretty resistant to, I don't know if it's Faith or Intelligence or just spells in general, but I feel like that one's pretty subjective. I wouldn't say it's necessarily right or wrong. Well, none of these are right or wrong, because this is just everybody's opinion, and if you have an opinion, it's not wrong, that's just your opinion. But I could definitely see this. Next hot take. Ooh, this is a long one. This one coming from Paper on Discord. The mountaintops of the Giants is one of the worst From Software areas. It's so boring, and the dead trees and grass try to make the place look better and just aren't. If it was just snow with the dead giants, it would be stunning. Yeah, well, I feel like if it was just snow with the dead giants, I feel like the place would look even more empty, and the complaints of it being, you know, like an empty wasteland with nothing to do there might be even worse than they are now. But I can definitely see what he's saying. Like, it does kind of make the area go from being, like, something that could be kind of stunning, kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? You see all these dead giants, it's just kind of like generic dead snowy area. Number 2, the Academy of Raya Lucaria is underwhelming too. That is what I've been saying. The Academy is abysmal. It's supposed to be the wizard place in the lands between, Academy where General Radahn learned gravity magic and where every sorcerer was taught, and yet the place has gravestones everywhere, and there are literal zombies running around the grounds. That is what I've been saying ever since I visited the Academy for the first time. It was underutilized to such an extent that it genuinely hurts me every time that I go there. Like, when I thought of the Academy, I was so excited when I first got there, man. I was like, oh man, there's gonna be like classrooms and different quests you could do here, like fun sorceries and bosses, but it just wasn't that. Like, sure, the area, there's a lot to do outside of the academy, but in terms of the actual academy itself, it's a pretty linear straight shot. Like, when you go outside, sure, you got the rooftops, you got the alternate path to the volcano manor, you got different teleporters, there's different stuff you can do outside of it, but the inside was lacking so bad, and I've said this multiple times, but me, I'm a Harry Potter fan, and the fact that the freaking Magic Academy didn't have anything, like, memorable about it just makes me sad. Number 3, FromSoft games, especially Elden Ring, have always had stories. Sony fanboys will like to tell you that Elden Ring has no story just because the game doesn't hold your hand. Games like God of War and The Last of Us feed you every bit of gameplay and jam your face with easy puzzles and quick time events. I don't need Atreus to bark in my ear whenever there's a puzzle. Instead, once I defeat a boss, I can go talk to Gideon and he can tell me more, or I can literally go anywhere else and watch boss cutscenes or talk to NPCs like Ronnie, Millicent, Selden, Shabiri, Dung Eater, and so many others. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. From Software games always have had story, and anybody that says that these games don't have story just simply haven't played the game or haven't interacted with the NPCs enough. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong way to experience a story. Personally, I like Elden Ring's form of storytelling as well as a game like God of War or The Last of Us form of storytelling. In fact, when it comes to video game stories, The Last of Us is my favorite video game story, period. But I will agree, yes, obviously, all of these games have story, and anybody that says, it's not a real story, I'm gonna read lore descriptions or talk to NPCs isn't a story, well, that's simply factually incorrect. There was very much so a story and lore here. Number 4, Waterfowl isn't BS because it requires you to have good dodge positioning as well as timing, not just timing like most bosses. Like I said earlier, Waterfowl is not BS, but simply a gimmick, and I don't think that a boss's difficulty should rely on one gimmicky move, and I'll leave it at that. The next hot take, an optimized magic build is hard to make. That's right, I said it. And I replied to the text here, but I said I wouldn't say hard, I'd say time consuming, and yeah, I'd still say that. Next up, this one coming from 2Dimensional in the YouTube comments. The open world is incredibly interesting for the first few playthroughs, but absolutely tanks the replayability after about New Game Plus 2. Ooh, okay, I'll talk about that more in a second. Each area just feels like a couple cool dungeons spread out among vast open areas that aren't interesting anymore and take so long to traverse it doesn't seem worth it after New Game. I 100% agree with this. After about New Game 1, I was so burnt out on Elden Ring that I did not even want to play it anymore, and I simply kept playing just because I don't think I'm allowed to say that due to legal obligations. Anyway, I had to keep playing the game for certain reasons, and by the time that I got to, like, New Game Plus 2, like you said here, I really did not want to anymore. And the thing is, like, the game is still a blast. I love defeating the bosses, exploring the world, doing this, that, and the other. But when you're trying to do what I was trying to do, and you're just trying to hit the main bosses, get to the next area, just experiment with builds, it is so boring in between every boss, having to run from, like, all the way from Godric, for example, up to the Glintstone key location, and then back up to the Academy, going the whole way through the Academy. It's too much. Like, in between every main boss in every area, you have, like, a 15-minute adventure on Torrent, and I cannot stand it. Like, in all of my videos, in my New Game Plus runs, there would literally be, like, 10-minute segments, and this isn't 10 minutes of raw footage. In raw footage, it would be, like, 15 to 20 minutes, but probably, like, 5 to 10-minute segments of the video would literally just be nothing but me running on Torrent and commentating, because there was nothing else to do in the game at that point. I just defeated Renala, let me run all the way up to Altus Plateau, or let me go get all the medallion pieces, and then back to the lift, and then I'll be at Altus Plateau, and it's so much running in between, man. I feel like a good fix for this would either A, be to introduce a boss rush mode, or B, after, like, New Game Plus, just let you keep the Sights of Grace. I know that might break, like, the progression of the game somehow in the coding. I think they could work around that. Like, maybe instead of having all the Sights of Grace be available from the start, what if when you started the game, say you step out into Limgrave, immediately you have all the Sights of Grace open in Limgrave, and as soon as you go to Caelid, you get access to all of the Sights of Grace that you have gotten up to that point, and then say don't have the Sights of Grace open in the Redmane Castle, for example, or don't have the one open down by Radon, but instead leave those blanked out until you can warp to a Sight of Grace close to the Redmane Castle, and then go to the Redmane Castle and re-unlock those Sights of Grace. I feel like that would be a happy medium. Yeah, I 100% agree. The open world is very interesting on the first couple playthroughs, but after that, oh god, replayability. Yeah, no. I've said this multiple times, but I have quite literally like 30 playthroughs on Dark Souls 1, whereas Elden Ring, I only have 6, and I'm so burnt out on the game just from all the running I've had to do in between all the bosses. Like, even thinking about getting on the game is just, it's very daunting and just makes me feel off. Like, I'm so burnt out on that game now. Phew, we got a hefty one. PvP is the worst part of the game. So much of the game is designed around PvP that the regular PvE players get the shaft on a lot of stuff. Those Colosseums could have been excellent challenge battles fighting terrifying foes for PvP and PvE. There are so many scenarios where I'm playing PvE and I can't go to Mogwin Palace because I need to invade someone. The PvP boss fights in the Soul series are also some of the worst. In addition, so much stuff has changed because the PvP players won't stop complaining about some of the most fun weapons and skills. I love ROB because it feels like the Mortal Blade from Sekiro and I feel awesome while using it, but then the PvP aspect of the game screwed me over and nerfed that weapon and 50 other fun weapons. I agree. You know what? Isaac Burton, you said literally everything that I would have had to say on the subject. The fact that PvP is tied to some of the quests in the game, I really don't like that because that means just think like, I don't know, 50 years from now when the servers aren't online anymore, what's going to happen when you need to do White Mask Varus quest, for example? Now, if there's a way to actually do that quest offline, please do correct me. But otherwise, I'm pretty sure you have to be online and do actual PvP for that. So what's going to happen? Is that just going to be an incomplete part of the game that you can't do anymore? Again, if I'm wrong, please do correct me. I don't want to be spreading misinformation. But if there isn't a way to do it offline, yeah, that kind of sucks that it's like been implemented into the game so much, and the fact that the PvP element does bleed into affecting the PvE players' builds and enjoyment of the game. Yeah, I agree. PvP is the worst part of the game. Don't even get me started on the netcode for PvP. Oh my god, PvP is abysmal. You hit an enemy and it takes like a second for it to register. May not sound like much, but that second really counts when you're in like a close PvP encounter. We aren't even like a quarter of the way through these hot takes. I'm gonna do like 1 or 2 more hot takes, and then after this, if you guys want a part 2, let me know, because we have a lot more to go through, and I'd be happy to share my thoughts on more of these. Let's end off on a banger from General Crispy. Elden Ring is a 7 out of 8. It's a great game, but I hate the reused bosses. I get side bosses, but even they got annoying. Not only that, the main story bosses, they have 2 versions of Godfrey and 3 versions of Morgoth. One to the beginning, second one at the capital entrance, and third is his final form of the throne. Oh, we'll talk about that one in a minute. And also, bosses like the Godskin are reused so many times. This was From Software's first open-world Souls game, and they did pretty damn good since it's their first take on the open-world genre. If they take their mistakes from this and improve in the next open-world Souls game, if they choose to make another open-world game, it could be amazing. I agree with that. I feel like they definitely have a lot to learn from here. The reused bosses, that was a huge issue for me, and it's my main complaint with the game. My disappointment could not be measured when I got to the top of the capital, and I just had to fight Margit again. Like, I understand, the hardcore elite is gonna be like, oh, but the lore! But the thing is, for me, like, lore does not make up for lackluster design. Use all the lore excuses you want. Like, that does not make up for the fact that it is a recycled boss. Like, sure, everybody says, oh, but the second phase move set is so different. It doesn't even matter, dude. The boss is so easy by the time that you get there that you shred through him, even on New Game Zero. I was so disappointed when I got there and I saw him again. I was like, but wait. I fought him earlier in the game. Like, could you imagine if you got here? I know this wouldn't make sense with the lore, but I'm just trying to throw out an example here. Imagine if you get up here and boom, Vortisax flies in. You gotta kick his ass now. Like, I'm not saying that's the boss that I would want. Personally, I don't even really like dragon fights in the Souls games, but you know what I mean? Like, something new and fresh. That's what I'm trying to get across. Like, it would be the same as if you were playing Dark Souls and at the beginning of the game you overcome the Bell Gargoyles, and then right before you go to fight Gwyn, you get to, like, the last Lord Soul, and then it's literally just the Bell Gargoyles again. It would be like, oh. Okay, I've seen this before. You get what I'm trying to say? Like, the wow factor of seeing, like, a cool and unique boss is just that feeling, especially in a Souls game, it cannot be matched. And when I went up here and I was expecting to see, like, a new and fresh boss and just be absolutely wowed, I got Margit again. I was like, oh, I'm gonna fight him again. And then I took him out first try, no problem. I understand all the From Software fans are gonna be like, well, it's a big open world, they had to recycle some bosses, but at that point, dude, like, I understand if you gotta recycle some side bosses, every RPG does that. But at that point, if you have to recycle so many bosses, I would have just preferred for them to shrink their scope a little bit. Maybe just take out, I don't know, half of the Mountaintop of the Giants, half the Consecrated Snowfield, take out some of the in-between spots, and instead of having all of these different bosses in the game, maybe just shrink that from like over a couple hundred to just being down to like, I don't know, 50 good bosses, 50 mostly unique and original fun bosses with good mechanics. Because while many of the bosses in the game, yes, they do have good mechanics, there is many of them that just feel kind of like, I don't know, they lack that From Software finesse. I really don't know how to explain it, but that's my hot take for the video too. Like, Elden Ring bosses, while they're good, they fail to stick with me. When I think of memorable bosses from Software games, I can name so many off the top of my head from the other Dark Souls games. When it comes to Elden Ring, not really. Like, there's some memorable bosses, but they don't stick with me as much as the bosses from the other games did. Again, there's a few notable examples, and even a few of the bosses from Elden Ring are in my top 5 of all time, like Radagon, Malekith, top 5s for me of any From Software game, period. Love those bosses to death. I don't know, there's just something about the bosses in the game. They're kind of lacking compared to previous entries, in my opinion. Like I said, this isn't even half of the hot takes, and we have many, many more to go through, so if you guys want a part 2, please let me know. And I'd also be more than happy to expand on a lot of the thoughts that I had and talked about in this video. Yeah, anyway, as always, a shout out to the patrons and channel members, Carmen's Fan Grandma, Lil Booty Tab, Big Daddy Matty, Chalupasaurus Rex, Rizak, Polar Ray, Do Webster, Lamassa, Bianca, Spurgatory, Drippy Cassant, Mellow Lasking, Desperado, Mason Irving, TJ on Y15, Flame71, Aaron Reynolds, and also, I just said Desperado, and I meant to say Computer Magic. I forgot he switched his name. Sorry about that. Thank you guys for watching. Have an amazing day. Stay beautiful. I love you all. And remember, don't go hollow. Peace.